Hey, you folks, you are very welcome to this week's episode of Genos Live. And we're excited that we're bringing to you what I think is the topic of the moment, and that is managing hybrid and remote teams. And speaking on that topic today, we have the man of the hour in this area, a guy who's written the best-selling Leading From Anywhere, David Burkus. And we've been trying to get him for a couple of months. I'm really thrilled to have him on board because he has what I would judge to be the single most practical book that I've found on how to take a team remote or hybrid, how to establish a culture around that, and everything to do after that. So really excited to get into that with him a little bit later on today. Just to get you started, the book is available on Amazon and pretty much everywhere else you'd expect to see it. If you want, and don't worry, I'm going to put this up a few times during the session. If you want to grab a copy of it, just hold your camera over the QR code or go onto your favorite bookseller and search for David Burkus Leading, and that will float right to the top of the pile. Now I'm going to put this back up again, but let me tell you, this is a practitioner's handbook where at the end of each chapter, at the end of each chapter, David gives you the how-to and the what to do next. So really found a tremendous book. I've read it through twice and I've listened to it completely once, and I've listened to it again and I'm halfway through that again as I'm doing my walks or my jogs in the morning. Really great book if getting your team going hybrid or remote is something that you're looking for. So we'll come back to David in a very few minutes. In the traditional approach, we're going to ask you, hey, tell us in the chat, where are you dialing in from? Because we have this United Kingdom of Genos, and we're playing a little bit of bingo with the countries just to see are we picking up any new ones. But also, can you tell us, and this is just really ad hoc sort of polling, are you back in the office? Are you working hybrid, or are you working totally remote? And how's it working for you? Any comment you care to share? Elaine will bring that up to us in a couple of moments. Other thing I want to say to you is this is a very practical topic. David's going to be talking about very practical approaches to going remote and building a remote culture. So what I would encourage you is to put your practical questions into the chat, and don't wait until we ask for them. Just pop them in. Elaine will work her way through them and will present them up to us as we go through the session. Let me tell you, as I always do, 2 or 3 minutes about Genos International. And I'm not going to do the Genos was established in year 2000, etc. Let me do it a little bit differently and just ask you, and I'm going to imagine that I'm seeing a show of hands, and ask you virtually to put your hands up and say, do you know anybody who, when they walk into the room, sucks the energy and the positivity out of the room? Now, I've done this so many times in front of so many audiences that I know if you were in front of me, the hands will go up, because everybody knows one of these mood vacuum cleaners or these psychic vampires. And I'm just wondering again, do you know anybody when they walk in the room, it just makes it a better, warmer place to be? And again, I know the hands are going up and you're thinking of those people as you go. And of course, what you're seeing there and what we're observing there is emotional contagion. And one definition you could put on emotional intelligence is having intelligence around the fact that emotions are contagious, and understanding that the way we show up, the way we choose to behave, and it is a choice, determines the way the people around us feel. The way they feel determines the extent to which they're capable of engaging. And that pretty much determines everything else about the outcome of that. And you'll see how this links really nicely into a lot of what David's talking about in the session here today, and links into pretty much every part of your life. The way you show up is absolutely seminal. That's what we in Genos do. Because as Bill Markland says here, culture is all about how your employees' hearts and stomachs feel about Monday morning on a Sunday night. And you'll hear echoes of this in what David's going to talk about today. That's what we do as an organization. We're about how people show up and how they make people feel. And we're pretty good at it. We do it with assessments, with development programs, online and in person. And we also certify people to do that. We're pretty good at it. According to trainingindustry.com, we've been one of their top 20 assessment companies over the last 5 years, and fingers crossed we're going for number 6 right now. This coming up on the 5th of October is the last opportunity to become certified as a Genos Emotional Intelligence practitioner before the end of the year. So if you're an internal coach, consultant, trainer, and you'd like to have a credential that allows you and gives you everything you need to bring emotional intelligence solutions into your organization, this is the opportunity to get it done before the end of the year. If you're an independent coach, consultant, and trainer, it's an opportunity to add a whole new line to what you do. Now, I'm going to show you a 90-second video, promise you it's only 90 seconds, that just talks about what the certification program is like. And what I'd say to you is, if the idea of being a newly minted CI practitioner before the 1st of January appeals to you, just reach out to us on that email address or scan that code there. So let me give you that quick piece of video, and then we'll be back and we'll dive into things. So again, if you do want to take that last opportunity, just reach out to us and we'll get you sorted out. So let me move on, and I'm going to bring in Elaine quickly before we bring David in, and just say, hey, what are folks telling us, Elaine? One, about where they're dialing in from, and two, what are they telling us about their working situation?
Yeah, hi Derek. Great activity on the comments today. So we have people dialing in from Seville, Spain, Macedonia and North Macedonia, Melbourne, Australia, London, Ireland, the Philippines, Singapore. They're from everywhere. So the comments are coming in, a lot of hybrid working, and people seem to be liking a mix of the remote and the face-to-face. It seems to be very suitable for people who are working internationally. So that's what we're seeing coming up in the comments. A lot of people saying they're joining us from their homes today. So
Okay.
that's great to see. So I think we have a really good audience of remote workers on today with us.
Great, thank you, Elaine. And I think, by the way, for the folks, and I'm probably going to leave somebody out, but for the folks in Melbourne and I think the Philippines, you're up late and you're certainly after your working day. So we really do appreciate you coming in and joining us here today. And I promise you, when you hear David talk, that it's going to be worth your while. And with that said, let me introduce the man of the moment. You're very welcome, David.
Thank you.
So we were having a good old chat beforehand, and let me before we get into it, because I don't have it on a slide, let me just say, folks, that David just a couple of weeks ago did another TEDx, the most recent of several, on one of the topics he's going to touch on today in TEDx Reno, and it's really worth going onto YouTube and picking that up, because he just goes into some super, if I can call them, war stories around developing purpose and so on and so forth. So really look that up, not now, after this session. So yeah, exactly. Listen, with no further ado, Elaine, can you give us a quick introduction to David, and then we'll dive into the conversation.
Absolutely. So welcome everybody, and welcome David. David Burkus is the best-selling author of 4 books about business and leadership. His books have won multiple awards and have been translated into dozens of languages. His insights on leadership and teamwork have been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, USA Today, and on CBS This Morning, just to name a few. As a sought-after international speaker, his TED Talk has been viewed over 2 million times. He's worked with leaders from organizations across all industries, including Google, Stryker, Fidelity, Viacom, and even the US Naval Academy. A former business school professor, David holds a master's degree in organisational psychology from the University of Oklahoma and a doctorate in strategic leadership from Regent University. And David's latest book, Leading from Anywhere, is a timely and fresh look at getting the best from remote and hybrid teams. Welcome, David.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks a million, Elaine. And Elaine is going to slip to the background there. She's going to be taking care of all of you with your questions and so on and so forth. And let me see if I can get this, just in case anybody misses the book. So let's leave it up there for a couple of minutes, just because really, as we go through this chat, I think you're going to find that you will want a copy of this. I just want to say before we dived in, David, that I was feeling pretty good about myself before Elaine did the introduction, and I missed it. And that was, you got 2 million views on your TEDx. I was bragging during the week that I had 47,500, and now I feel, 2 million views. Which one was that?
So that was the one, that was the one from 2016 on salary transparency. And the trick there is that was given as a TEDx, but the people at TED proper found it, took all of the original video, re-edited it, and then put it in the main channel as if it were a TED Talk from the TED conference, right?
Okay.
Which is kind of fun, because apparently, even though I didn't speak at the main stage TED, they're like, on the bio on TED.com, it says TED speaker, which is kind of cool, right? Because TED versus TEDx. But the truth is, we really just got lucky. Somebody must have watched it and sent it to somebody inside of TED and was like, you really should talk about this. And, it's on salary transparency, which means that every time the main TED account tweets it out, I get a new round of hate mail from people that are just, think that idea is terrible.
And you say you just got lucky, but there is no doubt the content obviously made that luck. It wouldn't have been picked up if it hadn't had the quality. So congratulations! Somehow that got past me when I read the original bio. Folks, David's book, as I say, is a very practical tome. It really is almost a handbook that gives you step by step on how to go remote and stay remote and lead effectively remotely. There are 10 chapters in it. Now today, we're actually going to focus on 2 of them. And I just want you to see how deep David goes just on these 2. The first one is about going remote, how to take your team remote and getting ready to go remote and so on. And the second is building culture in a remote environment. So I say that we're just focusing on the first 2 because I want you to be aware of how much meat there is in the book, because we're only focusing on the first 2. There are 8 more chapters, and there is a shed load of other pieces of guidance that are absolutely gold. So David, let's dive into the piece about going remote. You spoke about a lot of things in there, but you spoke particularly about 3 things that teams have to share in order to be effective remote. Do you want to dive into that and go a little bit deep on it?
Yeah. And this is, it's funny because I think where we are now, this would be almost like going hybrid, meaning as we get into a solid plan, right? I mean, we deliberately, I'll let you in on a little inside baseball, or at least inside publishing. We got into arguments about right title for the book, right? And the compromise that we made, they really wanted the word remote somewhere in there to speak to the moment. It came out January 2021. But I really wanted to emphasize the from anywhere, because it was obvious to me that, it wasn't obvious at first. I was naive enough to think we were actually going to do 14 days to slow the spread, and then everybody was going to come back to work, right? But after that was over, when we took away the number and it became obvious that this was going to be an 18 to 24 month thing, I realized nobody's coming back, at least not to the way they were. We're headed for this. I called it from anywhere because I thought that was better than hybrid, but we're sort of settling in on calling it a hybrid work arrangement. But that's the idea. There are going to be people in the office versus not in the office, et cetera. And so I think it applies in both situations, right? Originally, from what happens if you move a whole group of people who are used to being in person to remote, but also now we need to think about how we're going to do it in a hybrid context as well. And when you look at the research, especially the BC, like before Corona, research on hybrid and remote, you find that the teams that do it really, really well usually have leadership, but also have individuals that are committed to a sense of shared understanding, shared identity, and shared purpose, right? So shared understanding, shared identity, shared purpose. Shared understanding is about knowing, I would say, not only role clarity, like knowing roles and responsibilities, who's supposed to do what, how your work fits into the larger whole, having an accountability system in place that is keeping people accountable to what we need them to do, but not making them feel micromanaged or spied on. And I think that has to be paired with empathy, if you will. Like shared understanding is the combination of both clarity and empathy, to understand the different contexts that people are working in, which before, when everybody was remote, it was the context of different people's homes had different setups. Some people had an office. Some people had what used to be a guest bedroom, but turned into an office because no guests were coming to stay for the next 24 months, right? And other people were working from a dining room table while they were trying to Zoom school their children, you know? So shared understanding around what people are working with mattered a ton. Shared identity was really about how we keep the team feeling like one team, how we keep them identified as one team, which is hard enough when everyone's remote, but in hybrid, it's kind of even harder because you have people who are seeing each other every day and feeling that because they're in person, they're in office, feeling that proximity, or at least seeing each other 2 or 3 times a week. And then other people who are more remote, you start to get this us versus them unless you have plans in place to build shared identity. And then shared purpose, I believe personally, purpose is much more, and this is sort of the section of the TEDx talk that you were talking about earlier, is much more about connecting people to who is served by the work that they do, not necessarily this sort of grandiose why. And boy, if there's one thing we've been missing over the last 2 years is that sense of connection to other people, right? That sense of connection to the work that I do helps other people do this. We ultimately help our stakeholders, our clients, whomever do this. And there's people all the way through that, because it becomes awfully easy when you're just in your office at home on conference calls all day and replying to email. It's awfully easy to forget that there are people on the other end of all of those pixels. And so shared purpose really speaks to that idea of reminding people, this is why we do what we do. Specifically, this is who we're doing it for.
And on the going, and if we take those one by one and maybe dive a little bit deeper, you gave some really just absolutely stunningly intuitive, practical things that you can do to, and I mean that really, there's so much waffle in so many of the books that we read out there that you can't apply, and you just got down and dirty and said, here are things you can do right away. And so give us a few of those things that a team leader or a team in general can start to do to promote that shared understanding.
Yeah, it's funny, you're going to put me on the spot here to try and remember what was in the book for remote folks in 2021 versus things that we're doing with clients now in a hybrid environment. I'll try and give you a variety of both, right?
Great.
I mean, I'll tell you right off the bat, one of the things I recommended a lot of people do is, and I feel bad saying this to you because I'm looking behind you, I'm not the biggest fan of virtual backgrounds, at least not all of the time. I get it. This is more of a show. This is more of a show. I get it. When you're doing a one-on-one or maybe 3 or 4 people in a room call, it's okay to show your background every once in a while, because you might be embarrassed by it. You might think, oh, you'll see my kids, you'll see my cat, whatever. But, we need to know that. I don't know if you remember the clip from I think it was 2018, 2019, around the BBC dad clip. He's doing an interview.
With Little kid bobbles into the room.
We're all BBC dad at this point, right? We've all had that moment happen, and that's okay. I mean, it's one of the reasons I get a lot of people asking if this is a fake background, by the way. I mean, it's not.
It does look like a really good fake background, but
but I can grab stuff from the shelves. And the reason I actually have it is because it helps people understand 2 things. On the shared understanding side, it helps people know what I'm working with, where I am, that I'm a real human, not like some AR avatar. And then also helps people build a connection, right? Like, for example, if you're watching this, put this in the comments if you get this. If you're watching this and you get the joke about why there's a red swing line stapler, right? Yeah,
the limited edition.
Right. So now we have that little connection, right? So I'm a big fan of that. In the book, I called it virtual tours, right? You might not do your virtual background. You might do your virtual background most of the time, but every once in a while with your team, it's useful to let that team know what you're working with, right? As a leader, you especially want to know what they're working with, because if they're going to be committed to a long-term remote option or hybrid multiple days, we kind of need to help make sure they have the resources and the tools that they need, right? So that was one. In a hybrid environment, I've become much more a fan of making sure that people are doing things like huddles. I talked a little bit about huddles in the book, making sure that on a regular basis, weekly, sometimes daily, if you're in a hybrid format, I think this is like first thing you do on that 1 day a week or 2 days a week where everyone's in office, is to sync up on projects. Specifically around, I use a 3-question framework. So this is a super fast meeting. The 3 questions are, what did I just complete? What am I focused on next? And what's blocking my progress? So as a team, we're reporting out on, here's what I did, let's say last week. here are my priorities this week. What am I focused on next, by the way? This is a priorities question. This isn't a read me your calendar question. I don't need to know what your calendar is. I need to know what your priorities are, what you're committing to get done before the next time we meet. And then that last question, I think, is so vital. What's blocking my progress? In other words, where do I need help? We have a hard time asking for help. Right. And when we're working remotely, or we're doing those 2 or 3 days a week where we're working remotely, we have an even harder time asking for help. One, because there's no one around us to just ask for help casually from. But two, because we think, oh, I have time before I'm back in the office. Maybe I'll figure it out before then.
Sure.
And okay, yeah, maybe 20% of the time you'll actually figure out the problem before then, and no one will know that you needed help. But 80% of the time you won't, and it'll just get worse. And then by the time you actually bring the group in to ask for help, it's harder to help than if you had said it at the beginning. So what I love about a question like what's blocking my progress is it's not you're failing and you need help. It's you already told us your priorities. And as you look at your priorities for this week, do you see any potential roadblocks, any potential resources you need, any potential knowledge gaps you have that we need to get solved, right? What's potentially blocking my progress is an easier question to answer, but it gets at the same thing. Where do I need help? So I get, is that two? Is that good? Virtual tours, we've got huddles, we've got a couple other things we can do to build shared understanding, but we've also got to touch identity and shared purpose and all of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to derail and go ahead to something we're going to cover in a few moments, but that thing of actually feeling safe enough to be able to say, here are the blocks, here are the challenges I have. That's also another element. I mean, there are people who just would never expose themselves to a team that I actually am worried about something, or that there is a block. And I know we're going to touch into that. That's what I love about your work. Everything connects kind of to everything. But you also, there was one other, and it's kind of just in and around, and you say, give people a virtual tour of where you're working. And you did that a few months ago, and you let us see what was going on there. And so that understanding is, it's not just a shared understanding or philosophy of life. It's an understanding of the practicalities of the way of the environment you're working from, the way it works, the challenges you have, etc. And so it makes it much more human. So that's a great first step. It's understanding the people you work with most, right? Not only what are they committed to, but them as people, which is again harder to do in a remote and in a hybrid environment because you're not seeing them as often. And particularly because I guess post-pandemic, there's much more of a situation where you could actually be interacting on a regular basis with people online that you haven't actually met in 3D yet, who have been hired during the pandemic or since the pandemic, and just the opportunity to actually huddle with them hasn't come up. So it becomes even more important.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This is a, I'll be honest, a problem I wasn't anticipating in like summer of 2020 when we were scrambling and working with clients on how to keep everybody on the same page, et cetera. Because if you remember, pandemic also induced a recession and we were laying people off at the beginning, right? So we had the great work from home experiment, but then we also had the question of who gets to work at all, right? And then as we sort of rebounded from that, you get into fall and 2020, spring of 2021, we needed to hire back some of those people, or we had whole new companies that popped up. I worked with a company in the spring of 2021 that from the pandemic on had hired 150 people who had never been to the company headquarters.
Wow.
Right, 150 out of a 200-person organization, mind you.
Good
right?
Lord.
So explosive growth, probably triggered because of their industry and how the pandemic favored that industry. We won't get into that. But again, that's a huge dilemma of keeping people in shared understanding and also identity when you haven't had the chance to meet these people and wouldn't get it. I don't think they ended up meeting in person until late spring 2021, right? So, I'm a big fan of in-person meetings, but sometimes you can't do it. And so you've got to have a plan in place to be able to build that understanding and identity remotely.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. So having started building the shared understanding and humanizing the folks that I'm hybrid working with or remote working with, you spoke about something that you called in building shared identity, superordinate goals, which is a real mouthful. What's that all about?
Yeah, and this is really how identity and purpose sort of intersect, right? Okay. It becomes very easy in a remote environment, whether that's remote fully or whether that's the days that an individual employee or yourself are working from home. it becomes really easy to focus on the day-to-day tasks, the moment-to-moment projects, etc., and forget that sort of bigger reason of how our work fits into a larger whole. But in psychology, we have this term superordinate goals, meaning goals that are so large, they require interdependence.
Okay.
Right. So in other words, this is not your individual goals that your performance will be measured on, but reminding teams and also the whole organization that all of those individual goals flow into, here's our company-wide goal or our organization-wide goal or our mission. This is why we flowed into purpose from that. Here's the big thing we're going after. And so part of keeping up shared identity is reminding people that, yeah, we need these individual things from you, but they fit into this larger superordinate goal. The other thing with superordinate goals is that there have to be sort of stakes. In other words, there has to be, we could actually fail at this, and that would be a problem, right? In leading from anywhere, I talked about the easiest way to sort of arrive at a superordinate goal and a shared purpose. So now, okay, I'm already getting ahead of you on the run sheet. I apologize. But
yeah, no, it makes sense.
Is to start thinking about this question, what are we fighting for? Not who are we fighting? I think we're all sort of done with the 1980s business as war between competitors thing. Sure. But the broader cause, that noble ambition, right? That noble cause that we are fighting for, the thing we're trying to make right in the world. People, it's really easy to forget in the day-to-day of working just alone in your office or spare bedroom. It's easy to forget how that work fits into that larger thing that change that we as an organization are pushing for. And oddly, that is what keeps them feeling connected to the organization, almost as good as everything else, right? There's a concept we explored too in there around shared identity called uncommon commonalities, so individual connections to people. And when you get the combination of that, right, you're starting to build friendships, you're having non-work, unstructured time where people are connecting, and then also reminding people that you're connecting with these people and your work connects with them as well and serves that larger whole. That's how you really help people feel like a team, even if they can't see their team.
And in the I actually loved that piece, and I've heard it a couple of times as I've been walking around listening to the audio version of the book, and I think you did really right to say, what are we fighting for? By the way, it's not what we're fighting against, because I think that's a really appropriate distinction to make. And when you talk about what we're fighting for, if I recall, and I don't have a note on this, you spoke about there being kind of 3 types of fights that you're being engaged in. Can you talk about those? Because I remember thinking, oh yeah, and I know exactly where Jenna sits. I know what we're fighting for.
Yeah, exactly. And real so real quick, those 3 fights are what I call the revolutionary fight, the underdog fight, or the ally fight, right? And the revolutionary fight, to go back on something you said, is not necessarily the revolutionary fight is literally what are you fighting against. But what versus who, right? It's not about who we're fighting against. What we're fighting against, meaning, is there an outdated assumption in the industry? Is there a practice that everybody accepts as norm but is actually quite damaging? You think about a lot of organizations now and trying to figure out what their commitment to ESG goals are, right? Part of that is a realization that the way we were doing business before was unsustainable. And so there are assumptions we made about things we can't change that now need to be changed. And so that's a form of a revolution, right? Other disruptively innovative companies usually look at a stale element of an industry and go, that's ridiculous, it shouldn't take that long. Like I can point to so many companies in fintech, for example, in financial technology, that were saying, how does it still take 4 days to send money from one bank account to another? That's unacceptable, right? And so those organizations see themselves as leading a revolution, right? Leading against something that needs to be changed in the world. So that's the revolutionary fight, right? Almost what are we fighting against? Or how I like to summarize it with like a Mad Lib style template. If you can say the industry says blank is acceptable and we refuse to accept that, you're in a revolutionary fight, right? If you're saying this is the thing is what they say and we refuse to accept that. Then there's the underdog fight, which is quite simply sort of the David and Goliath. We've been overlooked. We've been underestimated. Most small organizations tend to rely on this, especially founder-driven organizations, but it's not because they're small. The underdog fight only works if you feel like you've been taken for granted of. If you feel like the major players in the industry, the bigger established companies, they're not even paying attention to you. They don't even consider you a threat, right? So that idea that we'll make them feel like We'll make them notice us. We'll make them feel threatened by us. They've overlooked us, and we're going to correct that. I'll be honest with you. I personally resonate with the underdog fight a lot. I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is if you know anything about Philadelphia sports, is a massive underdog city with an incredibly disruptive fan. Probably the only city in America that rivals some of the hooligans around football to clubs in the UK and Ireland, right? Right. It's really sports fan, and we're underdogs, right? Like the greatest sports hero of the city of Philadelphia is a fictional character who loses a boxing match, right? Rocky, right? We've all seen the movie.
Yes, of course.
He's our greatest sports hero. We built statues to a fictional character who loses a boxing match because we're that obsessed with that sort of underdog thing. So there's a motivating element there. And then the last element is the ally fight. And this is the one I explored a lot in the TEDx talk, what I sometimes now call pro-social purpose. And it's the idea of not necessarily what are we fighting against or what are we fighting for, but who do we serve in their fight against something, right? So sometimes, like my wife is in healthcare, right? And so you've got people waging an individual fight against cancer or against a specific disease or against a specific injury. And then what she is an ally to that person. That person's engaged in their own fight, but she's an ally to them. She's serving that person, et cetera. And I think one of the easiest ways to arrive at a superordinate goal, and I'll say this does not necessarily have to be senior level, come out of a grand offsite where we all go to a fancy retreat center and we spend 2 days coming up with the fight. Although if you want to do that, I do that with teams. I'm happy to, right? And so
we put the link up, folks.
Right, we'll be happy to. But what's more powerful is an individual team leader, an individual manager thinking about this and going, okay, how can I put this to words for my specific team? Yeah. And in doing so, it helps you point out that superordinate goal that keeps them connected. And it helps people remind that, like, the day-to-day drudgery of endless Zoom meetings does have a purpose. It may not seem like it in the moment, but it does have a purpose, and we can remind people of that purpose on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know that expression that you used, and you used it in the Reno talk. And again, folks, just for people who joined in a little bit late, after the session, go searching for David's most recent TEDx talk in Reno, and just go David Burkus Reno TEDx, and you'll get it. And he talks around something he's about to, or that he's touched on there. And one of the expressions that really got me, and the way you defined it, you spoke about pro-social motivation, and you said, who is served by the work we do? And that really got my ears pricked up, because immediately, as I say, I knew exactly, here's who we are, here's what we're in. So we're all pretty much motivated by pro-social goals or purposes, right?
Yeah, and this, you know, it's funny. I feel guilty about this. This is a lot of this research comes from two places. One is mega professor, if you will, Adam Grant. And he touches on this research a bit inside of Give and Take, but I don't know if it was his decision or editors, et cetera. They go to a much more personal level on Give and Take about making sure that you're a giver versus a taker, et cetera. Okay. And I read his same body of research, and I thought, this is fascinating, because there's a how do we keep employees engaged and motivated answer in this research too. Essentially, in a variety of different studies, we've found a powerful motivational and performance effect when we do something that reminds people of who they're working for. So in Adam's case, and we talk about this in the TEDx talk, it was working with call center workers at a university donation call center, reminding them why they're doing that, who is actually served by the money that's raised. There's another study, I'm blanking on the name of the authors, but it was done, ironically, at another university, but it was done in a cafeteria where they removed the wall between the kitchen and the diners actually eating that day, and replaced it with a glass wall, like a half wall, so that so that diners could see in and the cooks could see out. And what they found is that in the 3 weeks after they did that intervention, the actual diners' satisfaction scores were dramatically improved. In other words, the cooks cooked better food when they could see exactly who was served by what they were doing. Right? And then there's a whole body of research from Amy Resnesky and Jane Dutton around job crafting, which is it's funny to me because their research covers it from the standpoint of what do individual employees do to feel their own sense of meaning and purpose in a purposeless job. And one of them is what they call relationship crafting, making sure that they're having more interactions with the people who are served by the work that they do as a way to remind them of that. And I look at all the research in job crafting and I go, well, if this is what board employees are doing to motivate themselves, shouldn't we as leaders be doing this on a regular basis for them to help them, right? So there's answering that question, who is served by the work that we're doing? But then for a lot of leaders, the next step is going, great, what systems do I need to put into place to remind people of that? Is that increasing the interactions they have with stakeholders? Is that talking about it on a more regular basis, reminding people to do it, telling the stories of the people that were served on a regular basis? So it's not just who, right? It's also that kind of, how am I going to put the systems in place to remind people of that who on a regular basis?
Great. Folks, I just want you to notice, one, you can see why this man is a TEDx speaker. I mean, the passion and the excitement behind this topic is tremendous. But I just want you to notice that we haven't stirred outside chapter 1 yet. And David hasn't even explored all of chapter 1. As I said, there are 10 chapters in the book. So it's a very, very practical piece of work. Now, before we, because one of the things that happens if we're not careful here is we run out of road. So we've looked at kind of the getting ready to go remote. And we're going to go into building culture remotely. But I'm looking down at Elaine now. Yep, and she gave me a thumbs up just to see if we had any questions there from the folks. So off you go. Let's hear what folks have to say. Questions or comments?
So Dragana has 2 questions for you, David. Her first one is, how do you evaluate if a job or job role has the potential of being a remote work role?
So that's question 1, or was that question 2 combined?
That's actually just question 1. That's our first.
All right. I didn't know if you want me to cover both at once or not. So, I mean, the biggest thing here is there is, in any remote job, there is a balance that needs to be maintained between autonomy and accountability to the team. In other words, some jobs are really high on the autonomy and don't necessarily require much autonomy, right? I'm thinking about, I have a good friend who's a technical writer, essentially wrote manuals for, industrial products, et cetera. That's something that really doesn't require a lot of accountability to the team and connection. Maybe once a week she had to sync up with people, and then so that's in fact, it was a remote job before the pandemic, right? Then there are jobs that require a huge amount of accountability. Your job is essentially interacting with people. Usually as you get higher up in the organizational chart, you're going to end up, this is actually something I'm worried about, but we could talk about that later. You're going to end up in more meetings because you're going to be involved doing more decision making, more creative problem solving, et cetera. And that's going to require more connection to the team. So the first question to ask is that, right? Where does it fit in that spectrum between a total autonomy and a need to satisfy the requirements of the job with an accountability to the team? And then the second question is what systems can we put into place? Because every job's somewhere on the spectrum. Nothing's over here, nothing's over here. But what systems can we put in place if it's right here to make sure that one's getting done, right? The big challenge for remote or hybrid is not necessarily what could be remote or what couldn't be. Your people are going to want some level of remote, some level of hybrid, some level of being able to have autonomy over their schedule that they didn't have in 2019. So the question is, what systems, and if we can put any systems in place that help with that accountability to the team thing. Some of them, the answer is going to be easy. A weekly huddle does it. Seeing people 2 to 3 days a week does it. Others, we're going to go, look, there's really no way that we could do that. And then, so that's a job that we should be looking at and going, hey, this is probably a role that needs to be on site more often. The other thing I would say too is that for a lot of knowledge workers, it's less about whether or not the job can be remote and more about what tasks could be done remotely as they figure out their hybrid week, right? And making sure that we're not just coming into the office to satisfy a percentage of days that we wanted as a target in the office, and then we're all sitting on Zoom meetings anyway. Making sure we're asking what tasks are we asking people to do, and then what is the best location for those tasks in a hybrid environment.
Great. Thank you, David. Great. Let's take 2 more questions there, because I know, and this is the problem with this topic, you could just go and go. Off you go.
That's the thing. So Claire has a question. She said there's definitely a movement to having webcams off at meetings when working remotely. Some companies try and enforce this, her business doesn't. But she feels that part of the human connection is lost when you're just staring at a black screen. Have you any advice on how to combat this?
Yeah, man, I'll tell you, in the last 2 years, looking at a variety of different research, working with a variety of different companies, I've held just about every opinion you can have on webcams, right? From everyone on, you have to have it on, to there's some research we explore in the book that actually suggests for your one-on-ones and your check-ins, when you're talking to just one other person, actually having an audio only call increases the empathic listening, increases how you listen for the emotions more. I don't think there's anything special about the mediums. What I actually think it is 100 years of humans being used to talking on the phone and only 10 years of being used to talking via video. So I think that's it. It may solve itself over time. Here's where I've landed, right? After 2 years of taking every position and working with a variety of different companies. There are definitely times where cameras on makes the connection easier and makes coordinating who's going to speak when easier, right? Where I come down with is know your team and know the agenda for your meeting. And then in doing so, know when you want cameras on versus off. Here's what I mean by that. Some meetings are a mix of presenting information at people and then later asking them to discuss. Some meetings are just presenting information at people, right? And some are just discussion meetings, right? You have different purposes for different meetings. If you've got multiple, if you've got one, say it right off the bat. Hey, we're actually just going to be presenting a lot of information at you. And so you're welcome to respond to the comments, but I won't feel bad if you're not ready yet to be on camera, because we're just going to be presenting information at you. So stay active in the comments with us. Others, you might say, hey, this whole meeting is to discuss and debate. And so we really are going to need people to be on camera and attentive so that we can coordinate who speaks. And then if you've got one that's a mix of them, I do this with a lot of the workshops that I run with companies. If I've got a large audience, 200 or 300 people attending, is I'll say, hey, for the first 20 minutes, I'm going to be talking about some concepts, and I'd love to hear your opinions in the chat, but I won't be offended if you don't come on camera. However, at the 20-minute mark, we're going to be put into breakouts and you're going to be discussing something. And so you'll need to be ready at that moment to get on camera for it, right? So in other words, telling them when you expect the behavior of them, instead of saying, I want it all of the time or none of the time. Because I'll be honest, you don't need your webcam on if somebody's just going to share their screen and read their slides at you for 20 minutes. But at minute 21, when it's time to discuss, that's when we need it on. And we don't want to have burned out all of that goodwill by making somebody be on camera just to watch someone else read a slide deck.
Lovely. Yeah. Thank you, David. Very. I'm looking forward to ripping off that answer next time I ask that question.
Yeah, actually, go for it. There's a couple of comments, Lynette and Renisha. They're kind of the same opinion. People are already on that track, so that's good to see. But there's definitely people in the comments who that's going to be a great tip for them.
Super.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Steal away.
Well, so I tell you, thank you very much indeed, Elaine. I'm going to drop because we're starting to get into the last sort of 16 minutes or thereabouts. And I just wanted to queue up a little piece with David on the next piece, which is about building culture remotely. Now, let me do this. So I'm going to get you guys working a little bit. Let's hope the technology works. Yeah. So grab up your telephone. Okay, and either open the browser and go to PollEV, you see it at the top, pollev.com/Derek M, or if your phone is good at the QR codes, just scan that QR code. And I'm going to ask you 3 quick questions just to queue up the next part of the conversation with David. So when you hold that camera over the QR code, it'll ask you, do you want to link to a particular link? When you hit that, you'll come through to this and you'll be able to respond. And just tell me, first off, do you trust the people and the leader of your team? So just give us, and this is the sample size is going to be small, but just curious to see with the folks that are on here, what are we getting, if indeed we're getting anything? Okay. Is there anybody out there? It always takes a few seconds just to catch up, and we got a little bit of, I'm just going to make sure our link is working. We got a little bit of lag always on the, here we go. A little bit of a lag on the streaming as well. Okay, listen, I'm not going to burn a huge amount of time on it. I was going to ask you as well, do you feel respected by the people and the leader of your team? And I won't wait for the response on this because I want to give David the time here. And then the third question was, do you feel completely safe on your team? And David will know exactly why I'm asking those 3 questions, because it's stolen directly from the structure that he has in chapter 2, where he talks about building the culture. So can you talk to us about those the key planks for building that remote culture?
Yeah, the funny part is we've already covered some of them, right? And we designed the interview and the book this way, right? But when we look at culture, I'm the biggest fan of the question. I mean, I love actually your quote: "Culture is how people feel on Sunday night about Monday morning."
Oh, it's not mine. Yeah.
You could say it's how they feel in a remote world. You could say it's how they feel before they open up their laptop to join that virtual meeting, right? But I'm less interested in the broad question of culture and more interested in what makes for a successful culture. Right. And this is where there's a lot of research that all kind of dovetails on the same answer. The single best for a practitioner to read study on culture, in my opinion, is Google's Project Aristotle study. Not because it's the best, but because it's the easiest to understand, that is almost 100% aligned with a lot of the academic research. And what Google came up with is there were essentially 5 elements of a thriving team culture. And by the way, this is BC, before Corona research, but it was done on teams that were both a co-located, teams that were hybrid, and teams that were geographically dispersed. It's Google, tens of thousands of employees, so they have a variety of different teams, those teams in a variety of different industries. And let me see if I can do this from memory. This is actually going to be rough.
Good for you.
What they found was essentially 5 elements, what they called reliability, dependability, meaning, impact, and psychological safety. Okay, let's think about those. Reliability and dependability overlaps with that concept of shared understanding tremendously, right? Because shared understanding is clarity plus empathy. I can rely on people. I trust the people on my team. I know I can depend on them because I understand what they're working with. Meaning and impact, well, when you have that sense of pro-social purpose, when you know what you're fighting for, you have both the broader meaning of why we're doing what we're doing, and then the impact is that I'm making a contribution to that. So the only thing that we've left out so far is that conversation about psychological safety. And this one's really interesting because we know this from the work of Amy Edmondson. Psychological safety is important in just about every team. Project Aristotle was 3 different varieties of working arrangements. Here's why I think it's important to talk about in a remote and a hybrid situation, though, even though it's a constant throughout all teams, regardless of their situation. It's harder in a hybrid environment. It's harder in a remote environment, right? It's harder to speak up on a Zoom call and say something you disagree with, especially if you can't even get people on camera, right? It's hard as the leader to see that what would be a furrowed brow in a conference room in person, to recognize that, oh, she doesn't agree with this statement. I should give her some time to express that, right? It's harder when you're doing asynchronous communication. It's actually easier for people to think up all of the reasons why they're absolutely right and not have as much empathy for other people's perspectives. And if you don't believe me on that, go check your Facebook, right? Go check Twitter. It's nothing but people yelling at each other, because asynchronous communication allows for us to refine our argument before we give it, instead of work it out in person. And so psychological safety becomes even more important. Now, to why those questions were those questions, when you dive into Edmondson's work around psychological safety, you find that it's a combination of trust and respect. It's a climate of mutual trust and respect. And those are 2 different things. They're like 2 different sides of the same coin, and each is vitally important. I trust the team because when I'm willing, I should say it this way, when I'm willing to speak up because I disagree or offer a differing opinion or be my whole self to work, it's because I trust the team. But after that action, after I speak up out of trust, I need to feel respected. I need to feel that my differing opinion was included, was heard, was considered. Even if we didn't apply it, I need to feel that my dissenting opinion made a contribution to the end decision. I need to feel respected. Otherwise, I diminish in trust. So trust and respect combine to create this kind of flywheel, this virtuous cycle of psychological safety. And you build them both sort of differently. You build trust by being vulnerable as a leader and sharing the things that you're struggling with, the I don't knows that you have, so that people feel free to say when they need help. You build respect by how you respond in conflict, by how you respond when people disagree with you. And both, as I said, are vitally important. If you build one without the other, the flywheel doesn't click into gear, doesn't start gaining momentum. You might end up with a very civil culture where everybody's really, really nice, but nobody feels like they can disagree. That's just as much of a problem, right? Or you might build a place where everybody feels trusted in a moment and they admit a bunch of stuff and then it's held against them later, and now the whole thing is a disaster. So we need both at the same time.
Yeah, and interesting what you said there about psychological safety being more difficult to build in a remote environment. We had Paul Zak on last week, And I was telling him we
Oh,
were
I love
having you
Paul.
on, yeah, and that you quote him in the book. And one of the insights that I got from one of the many insights I got from his talk, which somehow had eluded me before, is that fatigue, stress, etc., diminishes psychological safety even in a fundamentally psychologically safe environment, and we tend to suffer more stress and fatigue in these remote environments or remote and hybrid environments where we're on the screen all the time. So you can have you can have created this really psychologically safe environment, and you bring people on for a 2-hour meeting, and it falls off a cliff. So it's and it's important to have that and to know that. One of the things that and by the way, and there were lots. There's so much rich research quoted in your book, but I thought this was a superb piece. It said research on high trust organizations show that they report 74% less stress and 106% more energy at work than low trust organizations. So trust is about the cheapest way that you could actually energize and engage people while at the same time addressing their well-being. Just fix the trust thing. And you talk, I know we don't have a huge amount of time, but how do you go about building trust?
Yeah. Trust is a performance enhancing drug, right? I think
there you go.
The easiest.
Love
and in a way, if you look at Zach's research, right, trust is a chemical, oxytocin. That chemical performance is a performance enhancing drug, at least as it applies to knowledge work, etc. Paul loves to say trust begets trust. That's sort of his phrase. I like to say it this way, that trust isn't given and trust isn't earned, trust is reciprocated.
Yeah.
And that means if you're in a leadership role, or even if you're an influential member of your team, how do you build trust? You go first, right? In order to build trust in a team, you're going to have to be vulnerable, and you're going to have to model vulnerability. People aren't going to be willing to do it until you're willing to be vulnerable. When you step out, I mean, these are easy ways. Like just getting used to saying, I don't know from time to time sends a message to your team that it's okay to admit when you're struggling. It's okay to admit when you need help, et cetera, right? The other thing I like to do is to make sure you're doing little actions that convey that you are trusting people. And so like, I feel bad saying this is like a cheap trick, but it works so brilliantly, right? Is if you're in a meeting and you can find a way to present some information that your team maybe doesn't necessarily need, but you have access to and they don't, and you can just utter the phrase, "This stays here."
Okay.
You'll feel the room change, right? Because everything you say afterwards is you're saying, I'm trusting this team with information that the organization, whatever, that you don't necessarily need, but I think is good for you to have. I'm trusting you with that. And what Zach's research shows is that when people feel trusted, they reciprocate with trustworthy behavior. So just getting used to saying that. Now, I mean, not all the time. You can't do it every single meeting because that's not going to work, right?
Sure.
But try it in the next like 3 or 4 weeks. Try and find some, whether it's a performance metric. Now, obviously, let me caveat here. Obviously, if you're a leader and you're a leader, right, and you're in a leadership team and they shared information that said this stays here, it has to stay here. You can't take that one back to your team. But find something you can share with them that is kind of privileged intel, and then utter the phrase, this stays here. Right. And you'll be amazed at how much more trusted that team feels and how the rest of the discussion for that meeting changes as a result.
I love that. I absolutely love that. That's something that I've written down. I'm definitely going to use it. And I think we've probably all used something similar from time to time. And as you said it, I thought, I think I've done that from time to time, but never made the connection that's why it made things feel a little bit better. Folks, we are at 5 minutes to time, and I told you we were going to run out of road, and I told you that it was an awful lot of meat, and we barely just scraped the surface of chapter 2 in the book, which, as I say, has 10 chapters. So I really strongly encourage you to go and get a copy of the book. And what we'll do is we try and encourage David to come back at next season and do another session with us, and that'll be down to your reaction and what your comments coming back and so on. But one of the things I forgot to say to you at the beginning, and it's probably too late, I was going to say, for those of you who are still here at the end, David has given us access to some resources, free resources that are really first-class pieces of work that go to supporting everything he's talking about. So documents, templates, checklists, etc. And I'm going to put up the link for that in a couple of moments. But when I do that, it's going to disappear, David, from the screen. I hope you'll be able to stay around for 2 minutes just so we can formally say thank you very much to you, David, when we close it down in about 5 minutes' time. So thank you very much. Really fantastic conversation. I just know it could run and run. And I just know that, particularly if we started the questions going, my God, we'd be here all day. So thank you so much. I want to make sure that they get this stuff. So I'll see you hopefully in a couple of moments. So here you go, folks. Let me get out of the way there. So you've got the link to the book already. You've seen that. Here are the link to the resources on David's site. So if you can go and you can use either the QR code or you can go to davidburkus.com resources. Now that shows 4. The screen actually scrolls down. I'm not sure how many resources there are in there, but there are tools and tips and checklists and document templates and so on and so forth to support all of the chapters in the book. It's a really, really first-class piece of work. Now, that's going to disappear very quickly. But if you're already registered to get reminders from us for Genos Live sessions, we're going to be sending that through to you. So you don't have to scramble to get it. It's going to land in your email very shortly after this with a link to a page that you can share with your friends, because we're going to have tomorrow, David's recording will run on the hour every hour for 18 hours on our stream page, on what's going to become the Genos TV page. And then day after he'll run 9 times, and then day after he'll run 4 or 5 times. So for those of you who are looking and saying, darn, I should have had these people here and these people here, we're going to send you a link to that. Now, if you want to get to that, here's how you get to it. Here's another QR code. This is the one for signing up just for the reminder list, which will also get you a reminder that yours truly is the guest next week. So I'm my own guest. And in a lovely show of synchronicity, where we had Paul last week talking about oxytocin and psychological safety and measuring it, and this segueing into David's connections to psychological safety. I'd love to say that we had planned it out this way. It just happened, and I'm delighted by the synchronicity of it. We'll be talking about how you build psychological safety with emotional intelligence in a very, very practical way. And again, as always on this show, giving you tools and tips that you can take away immediately. So we're going to send those out to you anyway. I will ask Elaine if there's anybody there scrambling who's not on the list to put those into the chat. All I want to say to you now, as we come to time, and we're about 30 seconds away from time, again, thank you so much for taking your time out of the day. I know it's not terribly easy. Thanks a million to David for taking time out of the day and for so much richness and so much value. And we will, please God, see you next week. So all the very best. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.